It's been a really, really long off-season after the New York Giants suffered another embarrassing loss against the Washington Commanders on January 9th by the score of 22-7. After what was probably one of, if not the most embarrassing 2021 NFL season that the New York Giants had in their franchise. And a lot of changes had to occur after that season. And of course, Joe Judge was fired. Dave Gettleman was quote unquote retired. The New York Giants ended up bringing in Joe Schoen from the Buffalo Bills as well as Brian Daboll to be their new GM and head coach. The New York Giants also were able to bring in a guy like Brandon Brown to be the assistant GM underneath Joe Schoen from the Philadelphia Eagles, and started to bring on change in the air, including in free agency where the New York Giants were limited by the moves they could make in the offseason. They were able to make at least a couple of nice signings during the offseason, like a Jahide White, as well as a Justin Ellis, and a Robert Foster and Richie James, as well as a Mark Lewinsky and a Max Garcia, as well as Matt Gano, Jameel Douglas, and just try to shore up some of those small areas going into the offseason. Now you're probably wondering, where am I going with this video? Why is Jeff talking about what happened this past offseason? Well, I'll tell you why. Because we finally have gotten here. After a long offseason coupled with a very, very long, difficult, frustrating, and just annoying 2021 season, the New York Giants have finally arrived at training camp, as the 2022 NFL training camp has officially arrived, and we're about to see what some of these young kids that were drafted or signed as undrafted free agents, some of these free agents the New York Giants signed with something to prove, as well as players that were currently on the roster last year who either didn't get to produce as much as they wanted because of either bad scheming, poor play, or injuries that they're coming back from. We're finally get to see what this New York Giants team is going to look like under the leadership of Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen, as well as under coordinators Thomas McGahee, Wink Martindale, and Mike Kafka, going into the 2022 NFL season. So what's going on, everybody? This is NYG Jeffy T 3285. I hope everybody's enjoying your Tuesday afternoon, as we've finally gotten here. We've finally gotten to the one thing that all New York Giants fans and NFL fans in general have been waiting for, and that's training camp has finally arrived, and we get to see these Giant players that have been on the roster on 2021 and beyond, that have been drafted by this team, like a Kayvon Thibodeau, like an Evan Neal, or some of these undrafted free agents like a Deshaun Corbin and Austin Allen, a Chris Hinton, as well as some of the free agents we signed like a Justin Ellis, Robert Foster, Mark Lewinsky, Max Garcia, Jameel Douglas, Matt Gano, Richie James. We're going to finally get to see all these guys get on the field and at least show us who is going to be positioned where are they going to be, what are they going to be in? Are they going to be part of the first team unit? Are they going to be starters? Are they going to be key reserves, special teams guys? Are they going to be guys that might not be able to make this roster and could be able to cut their teeth on the practice squad? So I'm going to be going undercover right now on which positional groups I cannot wait to see going into training camp and preseason, what battles are going to be going on for the New York Giants in training camp, which players that I'm looking forward to seeing the most, and what players I think have a chance to maybe break out and possibly make this roster that originally weren't expected to make the roster before. And also what players I think that were maybe looking like they could make the roster originally might be on the outside looking in. And just my overall thoughts of training camp and preseason as the New York Giants are about ready to kick off the 2022 NFL season. Now, most people would probably say one of the most exciting things going into training camp is you actually get to see these guys strap on the pads. You actually get to see these guys run some schemes. You actually get to see these guys, see what they get to hit a little bit, as well as to see where these guys are going to be placed on the roster, who's going to be part of the first team, the second team, third team, etc. One of the most exciting things I'm actually looking forward to seeing, and I can't believe I'm saying it, and probably other Giants fans agree with me. I can't wait to see this offensive line and the battles that are going to be put out there with the offensive line in general. And I'm talking about guys like Andrew Thomas being healthy now after coming off his second offseason surgery and seeing what he can do in his third year, growing into maybe one of the best offensive tackles and left tackles in the NFL. As well as I cannot wait to see our seventh overall draft pick, Mr. Evan Neal, play on that right side, as well as Mark Lewinsky right next to the rookie on the right guard position. I can't wait to see what John Feliciano is going to bring to this in terms of leadership, the grittiness, and what he's going to be able to bring to that center position. And then also, of course, the battle at the left guard position, because right now, third-year player Shane Lemieux out of Oregon, he looks like the favorite right now in terms of being the front runner for that left guard position. But there's a lot of pretty good competition that could be there as well, as it could maybe usurp a guy like Shane Lemieux from that left guard spot. And I'm talking about the rookie third-round pick out of North Carolina, Josh Azudu, who a lot of New York Giants higher-ups are very high on. And maybe could be a guy that's a perfect scheme fit and a building block for Bobby Johnson and his offensive line schematically going forward. As well as maybe a veterans like Jamil Douglas and Max Garcia. Jamil Douglas, who played with the Tennessee Titans last year, as well as Max Garcia, who was a center/guard for the Arizona Cardinals last year. These are a lot of guys that are going to be battling it out for that left guard position, and also obviously for a key reserve role for that offensive line. And then you also have to think about who's going to be battling it out for the reserve offensive tackle position, as it's obviously that Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal are going to be slated as our offensive tackles going forward. And for the Giants' sake and for the entire Giants brass, we hope that Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal are going to be the bookend offensive tackles for this team going forward for the next 5 to 10 years. But I'm curious to see who's going to be able to snatch up that reserve role. Maybe it could be a guy like Matt Parrott, even though he's coming off a torn ACL that he suffered late last year. He could be a guy that maybe the Giants brass looks at as a guy that can be a perfect swing tackle, or maybe even the former Atlanta Falcons offensive tackle, Matt Gano, who looks to be the odds-on favorite, since he was obviously signed by this brass coming into the offseason, that he could be a guy that could be leading candidate right now to snatch up that reserve swing tackle role for the offensive line going forward. I would have said Corey Cunningham would have been another name, but he was recently his contract was recently terminated in the move for the New York Giants made for Jonathan Neslap. That would just happen before, or Carlos Neslap. So right now, I'm really curious to see how that offensive line is going to come together. Curious to see who's going to be able to start at the left guard, as well as maybe I think even the center position might still be open, even though Feliciano is the favorite. Wondering how these guys are going to gel. Hopefully they can stay healthy. So I'm really curious to look at that. Another position that I cannot wait to see is the cornerback position. The most talked about position right now, besides the offensive line and obviously the quarterback position, is the cornerback position, because right now I'd probably say, as well as many other Giants fans, that is maybe their biggest question mark going into the season. As right now you have Adoree Jackson as your number one cornerback, and while we all think that he's going to still be a very good shutdown cornerback for that number one spot, he still is a guy that has dealt with injury issues, and you hope that he can be able to stay healthy going into the season. But then what do you have at the other cornerback spot starting? What do you have in the slot, as well as potential depth guys going forward? So you have guys like Aaron Robinson, Darnay Holmes, Zion Gilbert, Darren Evans, Rodarius Williams. You have Jaron Williams. You have Cordell Flott. You have a lot of these young, unproven guys that are rookies, undrafted free agents, as well as, I forgot about, you have Michael Jacquet, you have Maurice Kennedy, you have Khalil Hodges. You have a lot of guys that are either unproven, guys that are either getting their rookie seasons right now, undrafted rookies, as well as vet free agents that haven't really played the cornerback spot a lot and mostly been known as special teams guys, that are going to be battling it out right now for that not only number 2 cornerback spot, but also the slot cornerback spot, as well as reserve cornerback spots going forward. So this is going to be really an intriguing battle throughout training camp, because we really have no idea who is going to be able to snatch up those backup reserve cornerback roles, as well as who's going to be able to go in there and possibly, maybe go out there and show out and be a surprise that could possibly, snatch up one of those cornerback spots. And this is where I'm going to start with one of my surprise guys for to maybe who I didn't think would make the roster originally, and now I think is going to make the roster. I'm talking about the former Philadelphia Eagles cornerback, Michael Jacquet, as this guy has been making a little bit of noise when OTAs and minicamp were going on. As Michael Jacquet might be a guy that might be able to sneak on this roster and could possibly even play a key reserve role for this New York Giants cornerback position going forward, as obviously he has some ties with our assistant GM, Brandon Brown, who obviously signed Jacquet a couple of years ago as an undrafted free agent. And I think that Jacquet could be a guy that could sneak onto this roster. And another guy I think that could possibly be another guy that could sneak on the roster is Maurice Kennedy, because of his abilities to play special teams and obviously with his familiarity with defensive coordinator Wink Martindale. I think he's another guy that could sneak onto this roster. So those are two surprise guys who I think have a very strong shot to make this roster. Now, in terms of one other positional group that I'm looking forward to seeing is who is going to snatch up that backup running back spot behind Saquon Barkley. Now, you're all thinking that Matt Breida, the journeyman running back, who has mostly been known for his receiving skills in terms of his running back skills and what he's going to bring to this offense, he's a guy that maybe could be a wild card with this running back room, because Matt Breida, I think, is actually a very good system fit. He obviously has tons of speed and what he can bring to this offense, but he's also another guy, like most of these other Giants playmakers, he has never been able to stay healthy. And you have to wonder what Matt Breida is going to bring to the table in terms of health as well as his skill set to this New York Giants offense, as I think he's going to be a perfect asset because he knows Brian Daboll's offense. He's a perfect complement to what he's going to bring to this offense in terms of his skill set. I not be surprised if he's spread out wide in this offense. Maybe he's going to be able to take some slants up the middle, but the Giants are going to try to take advantage of this guy's speed. And I also think one of the biggest names that you should be looking forward to seeing is the undrafted free agent out of Florida State, Jashaun Corbin, who I originally made a video on about a month or two ago as one of the undrafted free agents to look forward to seeing for this New York Giants team going forward, as I really think Jashaun Corbin and his skill set, the fact that he hits the hole, very good. He's a guy that's going to be a north-south runner. He's a guy that can also play a part in the passing game, and he's also a pretty good run blocker, as the New York Giants need a guy that's going to be able to pick up the pass block and be able to run block pretty well at the running back position, as that's one of Saquon Barkley's biggest weaknesses in terms of his skill set. And I think a guy like Jashaun Corbin could sneak onto this roster, and the New York Giants brass seems to be very high on this guy going forward. So look out for him as a guy that can maybe be the second or even third running back on this New York Giants roster. Now, in terms of another position group that I'm looking forward to seeing, and I'm talking about the defensive line, as I'm really looking forward to seeing how this defensive line is going to be put together, and who's going to maybe sneak up and maybe grab a roster spot that you really originally didn't think was going to be able to do that. And another one of those surprise guys I'm thinking you should look forward to seeing is Chris Hinton out of Michigan, the undrafted free agent. I think he's going to be a very solid run stopper. He's a big guy up the middle. I think the New York Giants are going to want to have beef in the middle of that line, in the middle of that defensive line, as they were one of the worst teams in terms of their run defense last year. And I think they're going to want to try to beef up the middle of that line. That's why they signed a guy like Justin Ellis this offseason, and why they drafted DJ Davidson out of Arizona State, who's another big guy in the 5th round of the NFL draft. They're going to want to try to beef up that defensive line, try to make sure they're going to stop the run to help out maybe their pass rushers on the outside. And of course, we're all looking forward to seeing what Kayvon Thibodeau, Azeez Ojulari, Leonard Williams, and Dexter Lawrence as a quartet are going to be able to do for this pass rush and this defensive line going forward. So Chris Hinton is another name that you should look forward to seeing in training camp in terms of a guy that could potentially make this roster that maybe originally wasn't expected to be there. And then one last group that I'm looking forward to seeing, and that of course is my favorite positional group that I love to study, and that's the wide receiver group. As we all know how talented this wide receiver group is, and I made a video on this, on how the wide receiver group can be the make or break for this offense going forward and how talented they are. But of course, of injuries, we really don't know what we're going to get from this group. I think it's not even talking about the guys that are probably going to make the roster, like Kenny Galladay, Sterling Shepard, Kadarius Toney, and Wan'Dale Robinson, who are relative locks to make this roster. But I'm talking about the battles that we're going to see in terms of the 5th, 6th, and possibly 7th receiver spots, as there's a lot of guys in there that are potential guys that can make this roster. And of course, we're talking about Darius Slayton, who's been with the team for 4 years. This is his 4th year now, coming out of Auburn. Talking about Richie James, who's a free agent we signed, who is mostly known for his return skills, as well as being able to have a couple of nice games in the receiving game. And he was the former San Francisco 49er. Robert Foster, who obviously knows a lot of Brian Dable's system, coming from Buffalo. The big 6'2", 210-pound receiver who is known for as a deep threat going forward. Travis Toivonen, who's the undrafted, who's a guy that we signed in free agency. He's been making a little bit of noise in minicamp and OTAs, as he's also gotten some first team snaps. So I'm curious what he's going to do. Obviously, we know about David Sills. The Sills Army is live and loud. We're going to curious to see what David Sills is going to be able to bring, because he's gotten some first team snaps as well, and he could be a wild card to maybe make this roster, as he has the type of skill set with a big body, be able to take the ball deep. He's a pretty good blocker. He's a perfect system fit for this Brian Dable and Mike Kafka offensive system, and I'm curious to see what he's going to be able to bring for this New York Giants team in terms of the wide receiver unit going forward. And then you're talking about names like Alex Bachman, who's been part of the roster for the past couple of years. He's more of a reserve slot man, but he's also had a very nice training camp last year. Maybe he could sneak up on the roster. Talk about a guy like Austin Proehl, Ricky Pohl's former son, the former Rams wide receiver's son, who also had some ties with the Buffalo Bills. So you're curious to see what Austin Proehl could bring to the table. And you're also talking about guys like Keelan Doss, who the New York Giants signed as the former Oakland/Las Vegas Raider, and maybe he can be able to show something this offseason. So there's a lot of competition. Oh, Colin Johnson, can't forget about him. He's like a Kenny Galladay clone, but a little bit slower. You know, he's got that size and frame that maybe the New York Giants might want to add in terms of his outside blocking to maybe open up things for the pass game, you know, if they want to do some of those quick slants as well as some bubble screens and stuff on the outside. So there's a ton of competition that I'm looking forward to seeing in terms of the wide receiver position. And the one guy I'd say that look out for, and here's another one of my breakout guys, and that's David Sills. I really think that maybe this is the best chance for David Sills to be able to have his skill set completely used because of the familiarity he knows with Brian Dable. And I think if anybody could get the most out of a guy like David Sills, it's Brian Dable. And of course, he's one of Daniel Jones' favorite targets, as this guy has been practicing every single offseason with Daniel Jones. He's got a very tight-knit, good relationship with Daniel Jones. And you know, if David Sills has the opportunity to get out there and maybe show something in training camp and preseason, Daniel Jones was going to love to see what David Sills could bring to the table. And maybe this is the best chance for David Sills to be able to go out there and show what he can do for this New York Giants team going into training camp and preseason this year. So I'm really curious to see what David Sills can bring to the table for the New York Giants going into this offseason and going into training camp and preseason, as we're expecting a lot for this New York Giants team. You know, the positional battles are going to be fun. It's going to be fun to see who's going to be able to break out. As a couple of names I think that you originally thought were going to make this roster, who I think are not. I'm actually talking about a guy like I actually think a guy like O'Shane Ximines is not going to make the roster, but a surprise name who I think is not going to make the roster, who could have eventually been there, is Darius Slayton, because I think Darius Slayton has had his chances to make this roster, and I think because of now a new regime coming in, Darius Slayton's also been getting second and third team snaps. I don't think his days as a New York Giant are going to be very, very promising. And another guy I think that should be on the outside looking in is Max Garcia, as he's been taking snaps with the third and maybe even fourth teams. And this is a guy you think was going to come in and be able to get snaps with the New York Giants first or second team as a key reserve guy, and maybe even compete for that left guard position. I think Max Garcia might be a guy that could be off the roster going forward. So these are just my overall thoughts for training camp coming in. We finally arrived after a long offseason, coupled with the horrendously bad 2021 season. We finally arrived at training camp. New York Giants fans, time to get excited. It's training camp is here. The preseason arrived. Another football season is here. We'll have to see what Brian Dable, Mike Kafka, Wink Martindale, Joe Shane, and this new New York Giants regime is going to bring with some of these rookies like Kayvon Thibodeau, Evan Neal, Wan'Dale Robinson, Darian Beavers, Michael McFadden, Dane Belton, Daniel Bellinger, DJ Davidson. We're going to have to see what these guys get. Cordell Flott, what they're going to bring to the table for the New York Giants going into preseason and training camp, and obviously leading to the 2022 New York Giants season. I cannot wait. I'm excited for the 2022 season. I'm curious to see what the New York Giants are going to do. I'm not expecting a whole lot. If we win at least 7 to 9 games, maybe 10 if things break right, I'll be happy, but I'm just happy for a new season. I cannot wait. And we'll have to see what this New York Giants 2022 team is going to bring to the table for the fans, for the New York Brass, and in the NFL overall. So if you like the video, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already to NYG Jeffy T 3285 for more breaking news updates and chatter surrounding the New York Giants, New York Mets, Brooklyn Nets, WWE Wrestling, as well as food for thought. Leave a comment below on the players that you think are going to break out during training camp and preseason this year, your overall thoughts and excitement for training camp and preseason, what players you think that were originally going to make the roster now probably are going to be on the outside looking in, and what positional groups in training camp and preseason you're looking forward to watching the most as we kick off the 2022 NFL season for the New York Football Giants. So I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your Tuesday. I hope you're excited. Football is back. Let's go, New York Football Giants, and we all cannot wait to see what the New York Giants are going to bring to the table in 2022. Take it easy, everybody. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and always remember this. New York Giants, Together Blue, all the way, the best franchise in all of NFL.